You're listening to Rock Solid People, a podcast by Max King.
The harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph.
So welcome to Rock Solid People. This is a podcast where I'm Max King. I interview individuals that I find interesting in the disability space. And today I'm very pleased to have with me Elisa James, the CEO of Plan Tracker. Are you still CEO of Plan Tracker? I'm not sure. And we'll get into the guts of why I've asked that question shortly. But are you still the CEO of Plan Tracker?
Well, that's a very good question. I am for another 6 or 7 weeks.
Well, that's
then
good.
we'll see what happens. No, not
We'll
quite.
see what happens. And for those people that don't know, some exciting news for Plan Tracker. We'll get into that shortly. But what I'd really like to know, Lisa, is you and your story and your background. It's an uncommon event to see an individual, a female, running a tech business. Not as uncommon as it used to be. I'm really excited that you have been one of the shining success stories of the NDIS and from a tech perspective. I'm keen to hear your background and how you came to set up Plan Tracker.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's certainly, I didn't start out in life with a plan to start a tech company and a plan management company in the disability sector, but life has funny ways of taking you down a path. So I've always loved tech. I was one of those kids who, programming on Apple Basic way back in the day.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
all
back
those
in the
things.
day.
Back in the day. And I've loved tech all the way through. But I went off and did a social work degree, of all things, which I was very badly suited to. So I, shortly after finishing that, living in Perth, ended up moving back across to Sydney, where I went and did some adult ed, multimedia actually, online multimedia, which was a very new thing, learning how to help technology for training people.
Yep.
And at the same time moved into the technology sector, running a training company for software training, all sorts of things, Apple, IBM, the whole lot. So after that, I started running a tech company that had established looking after retail leases. So the big Coles, Myers and others of the world who lease all of their space.
Yep.
And I went in and fairly quickly ended up actually running the organisation. And that was a pretty phenomenal few years, 5 or 6 years there. So my love of technology just continued. And for me, it's always about that sweet spot between technology serving people. So if you can do things in a way that makes technology work for people and just helps people do their best, then that's the sweet spot. So moved to London 20 years ago, spent 10 years there, also helped start a tech company over there and doing some first cloud-based kind of work in the not-for-profit sector, looking at CRMs and other things in that space. And when I moved back to Australia about 10 years ago, by that point we had 3 kids, and it was pretty obvious that my middle child wasn't really managing with life particularly well.
Yep.
And we spent probably the first 6 years of being back really was just very tough. There's no other words for it. It took us a long time to figure out that he was autistic as well as some other things going on. He's a very, very bright kid, but sometimes that tortured soul comes out quite strongly. So I spent about 6 years he was 7 and growing through all of those years and, getting expelled from school in year 2 almost and falling in and out of schooling through most of primary and hitting high school. And it used to frustrate me no end because I think, I have a lot to offer, but there's no way I could have a job. I wouldn't last a week with just the demands of my life. My life was very much not my own, and which I chose to make that choice there.
Yep.
And I just kept thinking, at some point I'd like to do something in business, and I really want to make sure that whatever I do, there's a place for people like me who it might be difficult to contribute in a traditional 9-to-5 approach. There might be a bit more flexibility needed, but wouldn't that be great to tap into these incredible resources? There must be thousands of people in a similar situation to me, around the country. So lo and behold, the NDIS started to come about. 2015, I heard about the NDIS and I thought, oh, look, I don't think it'll be for us.
Really?
You know,
Wow.
yeah, disability help at that point had been so difficult.
Yep.
You know, we had a respite package that the company who had it could never tell me how much it was worth or what we could access. And they were literally like, you just need to book 2 hours once a week on this day. I'm like, that doesn't work for my life. I want help in school holidays. And
Yeah.
And they were like, well, sorry, our team are not available in school holidays. They're off doing
They're
day
on holiday.
programs.
They're looking after their own kids.
They're running day programs. And I was like, I don't actually even like your team. I don't want to leave my child with your team. This is, it just didn't work. So I really was a bit dubious about the NDIS.
Wow, yeah.
But I came back from that information day, absolutely changed my thinking.
Wow, great.
And what changed for me was that I suddenly saw that if you were in control of your own funding, if you could make your own decisions, if you could choose your own team, if you could choose when and how you connected with them, that it would be absolutely life-changing. So NDIS hadn't rolled out yet, but I immediately looked around in my world and thought, right, who can I find? Who's a teenager that I can find that can come and help my son leave his bedroom? Because at that point, I think he'd been refusing to leave his bedroom other than to get to school for a good couple of years. Just, leaving the house was hard. Coming downstairs and interacting with family was hard. Everything was just hard. So I ended up paying a kid to come along once a week and play Xbox.
Yep.
And we slowly moved him from the bedroom to the playroom to downstairs for bottle flipping and eventually outside in the backyard to have a swim over the course of about 12 months, which was fantastic and just inspired me to be, okay, we need to have supports that work and actually engage with him, not just, things that just aren't working for us. So NDIS came along, and in the meantime, I'd been thinking, how do we self-manage? Because that was really all I knew about at that point. I said, well, self-management's got to be the way to go. How will I stay on track of what I'm doing? How will I make sure I don't overspend? How will I make sure I budget out properly? Australians are kind of notoriously bad at budgeting. It's, how many people really have a family budget and stick to it? I think the stats are not that great.
No.
So I thought, how do I help make this easier for other people? If this is an issue I've got, how can we do this? So of course, as they say, there must be an app for that. So
Yep.
I went looking, and of course there wasn't an app for that. So Plan Tracker was born and developed a self-management app, which was released about August 2017.
Yep.
So that's pretty much how we got started.
Wow. And just for those who don't know, the self-management app, like you mentioned, it obviously keeps you in track and it gives you that. What's the, not the elevator pitch necessarily, but what are the key functionality that listeners might want to know about it?
Yeah, look, I'm a big believer in just keeping technology simple and making it useful. So you can have something that does the bells and whistles, but at the end of the day, if you can have an app that you can very quickly check, where's my balance up to? Do I need to pay any bills? Are there any things I need to claim? That's a huge advantage. So for me, for example, I had one night I was thinking about my son being involved in youth group. And I thought, I wonder if I could find somebody to help him be a bit more involved. He's been attending, but he stands in the corner and we're just not breaking those barriers. It's just not working. So immediately I could just grab the app out, had a look, threw it in, youth group once a week, $60 or $75 or whatever I thought it might cost me for the hour and a half. And it quickly tells me, yep, actually you've got enough in there. You'll have a little bit left over in that budget for the end of the plan.
Yep.
Good to go. And so that's pretty much what it does.
Yep.
It just lets you do some of that admin piece,
Yep.
as well as that on the fly, can I spend money on this?
Yeah. Now I've got two other questions that have just come out of what you've been saying, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's a very personal journey that you've been on. My question for you would be that, say your son had come 10 years later, let's just say you were 10 years later. Would the NDIS have been in a much stronger position to have helped you and your family with the diagnosis and treatment and solutions and supports for your son? Do you think that there has been a seismic shift?
I think there probably has. What I found interesting in our diagnosis journey. And in fact, I have 2 girls as well who have both been diagnosed with autism in subsequent years. You'd think I'd get good at picking it, but no.
Yeah.
So, they're not the most, obvious, I think, sometimes, young women. But look, I think there's been an increase in community awareness of disability, not just autism, but many disabilities. And I just love the fact that we see more people in our community with disability now than I ever remember as a child. And I think there's a much greater awareness. Would it have been helpful if people who had already thought it was really obvious to them back in the day had made it a bit clearer to me? Probably. I don't know. Maybe I wasn't listening. It's hard to know. I hope I've gotten better at listening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's that old adage, isn't it? My son had identified the car driving towards us the other day had its lights on. And all of a sudden we were talking about European cars have lights on, or it may have been Japanese cars, or whatever the conversation was. And next thing you know, we're seeing cars with lights on everywhere. It's almost like bringing that attention and awareness to it. But I think you're right. I think the community has embraced, and so it should do, prevalence of individuals. They're not hidden away or kept, in isolation, or those sort of day programs are inclusive now. They're coming out into the community. That's exactly what we want, rather than it being.
Yeah, look, I think we've still got a long way to go, definitely, but we're on the right track. And that's the part that excites me, and I think is why why I am so passionate about the NDIS and so passionate about making sure that we as a community end up with a scheme that actually serves our community. I want to know that when I'm no longer here, that my son is going to be able to access the supports he needs to, and that others can still access those supports. And as a parent, those years come around pretty quickly. So.
Yeah. And look, there's a whole conversation we can have around scheme sustainability, but I've actually got a technical question that I'd like to ask you. I personally was quite excited when the API came out. And I'm just curious, has Plan Tracker, have you managed to navigate the idiosyncrasies of the NDIS API? And are you currently engaged in a conversation with them? We found it incredibly difficult and challenging to access API and I've not got a technical background, so my hurdles came up when I started just downloading the documents you needed to complete. I struggled with that. So I've sort of parked that. But I'm curious, as someone like yourself with a tech background, how have you found and how are you currently engaging with the NDIS API?
Yeah, look, it's a really great question. For those that are not quite sure what an API is, that's the ability for 2 computer systems to talk to each other. So instead of having to download a file like we do right now to make our claim and upload it, and then wait to download a file and then physically have somebody sit there and upload it means it can happen pretty automatically, which is one of my favorite words.
Automatically, I do like that.
Having a lot of experience in tech, I actually chose not to rush into this space. And the reason for that was because when things are brand new and knowing how tricky the back-end NDIS system is to operate, I just was dubious as to how quickly the quality of the API would be there. And you need to invest when you're building technology. We use APIs all the time in our business, in all sorts of spaces. But the NDIS API we kept putting on the back burner, mainly for a couple of reasons. One, we were quite busy doing other things that I'm excited about, and bringing out a support coordination portal and a few other things like that. But mainly because we knew, in keeping in touch with the team and with others who are in the same boat, that the quality just wasn't there yet. It's still not quite there.
No.
The speed is not there. There's just not quite. You just need a bigger, fatter pipe. They need to allow more calls to the API. But it will come, and we know that. So I figured I would just let everybody else, all the keen ones, do a bit of pain, and then when it was ready to go, actually then at that point it should be pretty reasonable. But we've actually just started working on it in the last week, so.
Well, that's exciting, and I hope that you have. I mean, we've been working with an organisation called Care Access. They actually are specifically designed towards helping plan managers and support coordinators access the API. They're an awesome organisation, but we have. I mean, they're basically getting 40% of what we need to make it viable. And obviously they're putting a lot of time and effort into making this work. And I was curious as to whether you might have had more success, but and good luck with your current project. And I guess that neatly brings us on to ups and downs that you've experienced in establishing a tech business, whether it's in the NDIS or not. But I'm going to ask you specifically about Plan Tracker, obviously, the ups and downs you've experienced and any advice you might have for budding tech entrepreneurs.
I think the hardest part about this sector is that there are still so many unknowns. So when I started back in 2016, obviously, nobody quite understood how self-management worked at that point. And plan management was, yes, it had been around in trial, but again, the number of changes that have happened in that space has been huge. So when I started to obviously do our research and development and read everything we could and talk to people just didn't know. And at the time, there was nothing like what we built. So when you tried to ask them about what they might need, they really had no idea about what they might need. So that was tricky. We registered for plan management very, very early and just did that very quietly on the side as a bit of if you are a budding entrepreneur, I recommend you read The Lean Startup. It's an excellent book. It just really helps you to think about what's important, testing your ideas all the way through and not building on assumption. So one of the things I've just learned in my career, I guess, is about any technology when you build it, if you hard code information in. So if you say, well, we think that the NDIS budgets are never going to change, and so you build a structure that only allows for it to ever look like that, then the minute that the NDIS comes out and says, oh, we're going to do it differently, or we're going to let you have flexibility in core, or we're going to whatever it is, then it means that you have to go back and rebuild, and that's expensive. So one of my things I guess I've always tried to do, and we still do, is very much look for universal solutions that work for what's needed now, but build in the flexibility so that when we get to fixed and flexible budgets, that's not going to be a hard thing for Plan Tracker to take care of. That's already accounted for, in both back-end systems, in our app. But I think trying to just build things in a flexible way so that you've got more flexibility as things change makes the world of difference.
Sure. Yeah. Solid advice. And yes, we do know the landscape changes in the NDIS quickly, swiftly, and not often, or often without, I guess, what we would consider to be proper due thought and process around what the consequences are. Notable for the change in support coordination at the end of February there with 3 days notice. Absolutely shocking decision. And I guess probably might just ask you about that. Obviously, your role in the DIA, for those who don't know, the Disability Intermediaries Australia. I always say association, but I think it's Australia. I always get this.
It is Australia.
They are the big body that represents the intermediaries, the plan managers and support coordinators out there. You are on the board. Thank you very much. I'd like to say a big thank you for everybody that puts their time and effort into the DIA, because we feel very warmly supported by you, and it's an important facet, I guess, to have that. But your role at the DIA and what you see the DIA is and what it stands for and what the challenges are in the intermediary space.
Yeah, so I'm actually a founding member for DIA.
Congratulations.
Back in 2018, January 2018, I made a decision. We'd had our app out in the previous year, and we'd been plan managing, but very much on the side while we were focused on getting our self-management app out the door.
Yep.
And so I launched plan management properly late January 2018, and it very quickly became apparent that our sector was just as often new sectors are, it was in a bit of a schmozzle, and there was a whole variety of people trying to understand, how does this work? I think there was like 4 lines of information about plan management from the agency. Here's a whole new sector with no clear direction of what this is, how it needs to operate, and no clear mechanisms for feedback to the agency. Those who were larger had stronger voices and were able to go direct. But, small organisations like ours just getting off the ground, we didn't have that voice. And so I banded together with a few others and we said, I think it was about October, we said, all right, let's do this. And it was interesting at the time because was somebody else, I can't even remember who it was to this day, who was invited to be a part of it. And they said, oh, do you know what? I'm just too busy. And I thought, oh my gosh, my life at that point, my husband who had worked away from home and was still working away from home at that point, Monday to Friday he's a technology person as well.
Yeah.
So he wasn't home midweek. I had 3 kids, one with significant disability and challenges of making it through each day. And I just thought, I don't really need to add founding a peak body to my plate right now. But if we don't get this right as a sector, then there won't be intermediaries. To me, it was as black and white as that. We have to have a thriving, healthy intermediary sector. That's a really good thing for participants. And the reason it's a good thing for participants is because if you don't have independence, and that's what intermediaries should be, they should be that independent role. If you don't have independence, then there's nobody there whose primary purpose is to represent that individual. I mean, obviously there's families and there's advocacy, but often under block funding, what we saw is that individuals would have all of their funding held by an organisation and all their services provided by that same organisation. And remember in 2018, that mind shift was still very much happening from welfare mentality, block funding to individualised funding, and the thought that participants and families could actually operate as consumers. One of the things I love about the NDIA, the heart behind it, is really that concept that every individual should be able to contribute socially and to participate socially and economically within our community. And the NDIS actually allows people to do that in terms of you can now be a consumer. You know, you can choose, if I'm not happy with my service here, I can swap and change to a different service provider. If I want to have a variety of providers, I can have a variety of providers. You know, if I want to buy my consumables from 3 different places, I can do that. And so it's really important that intermediaries like plan managers, support coordinators are there to provide that independent voice, that independent support for people. Otherwise, we can end up very quickly back in a situation where people are accessing all their supports from one provider.
Although wouldn't there still be some level of accusation against that? This sort of 80-20 rule, it seems that 80% of funding goes to the 20% of the biggest providers. Is there still some truth and value in that?
I think it's a period of time bringing out any new scheme. And, you know, it's a little bit like leading edge, bleeding edge sometimes, isn't it? It's definitely a space that we have to represent well, and we have to say and help explain to people that actually support coordinators and plan managers should be part of somebody's team. That's how we should see the role. It's a professional services type role that people purchase. They purchase plan management from their funding. They purchase support coordination from their funding. So they should expect a certain level of, or a high level of service. They should expect value for money. They should expect that service is there representing their needs. So I think there's over time we've seen plan management grow.
Yep.
It's increased dramatically since we've become involved back in 2017. And I think there's very much, we're down to now, I think it's 20% of people's plans are fully agency managed at this point,
yep.
which is really good news. I'm a bit passionate about self-direction. So, you know, whether you choose to have your funds plan managed or you choose to have them self-managed, as long as you're able and in control to make your decisions and to be able to, as the expert in your own life or your loved one's life, make your own decisions, I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. And that neatly does dovetail into the idea of continuing independence for the sector of intermediaries, support coordinators and plan managers. We often have a lot of people speculating about what the future has in hold. And that, whilst you don't know, I'm assuming, any more than anyone else do, but the crystal ball, if Elisa James was looking into it, what is the future holding for that independence? And will there be support coordinators and plan managers separated? Will the intermediaries be isolated from other organizations? Is it Chinese walls? What's the future hold for the independents?
Oh, look, it's a really good question. One of the pieces of work that really was a catalyst for getting DIA started was to do to do a piece of work around sector standards to say, let's as a sector, let's not wait for the agency to determine what this service looks like. Let's actually get that feedback from our community, from our customers, and through that, let's do a piece of work on sector standards that says, these are the standards that, the minimum and the high standards that we'd expect in each of those two areas. I personally think there's no issue with a plan manager also offering support coordination or vice versa, so an organisation doing both. I think if you are going to access those services through a provider who also provides other services, then it's better to get your other services from somewhere else because you do lose the independence. And I've seen a lot of examples where the Chinese wall really isn't very much of a wall at all. So.
No, and look, I mean, we have in the Southern Highlands where we're from, we have some very clear examples of where that independence is being abused. It's really a shocking state of affairs, and we feel very, very strongly that something should be done about it. But again, it's also their choice. So at this stage, we have to, and it's. We take on lots of fights that we try and fight. Sometimes you have to pick and choose them, which is it's also what you've done. You've picked and chosen you say 6 or 8 weeks left of CEO of Plan Tracker and taken the extraordinary decision to join Plan Partners. Tell us about that and what you see as the benefits of joining a large organization like Plan Partners.
Yeah. So look, it's an interesting one because if you'd asked me back in January of this year, would we be, coming in under Plan Partners in July, I'd have just said, are you serious? But actually, I got to about February and a few things happened and I was really just mulling over this idea as I'm always one of those can I map the future type people. I like to look forward. It's strategy is kind of one of my bents, I guess. And I looked forward and I just thought, okay, what do I think is happening within the plan management sector? What will it look like in 3 years' time? What will it look like in 5 years' time? And what do I need to do for Plan Tracker to make sure that we're right up there in the top of, in the top list at that point? I think they've at last, I'm not sure of the latest figures, but only about a year ago, we had like 950 active plan managers across the country. We all know that's way too many.
Yeah,
we know that
it's not sustainable. It's not profitable for a lot of them, and a lot of them have got into it for the wrong reasons, I believe. But yeah,
exactly, that's right. And as those roles grow, I know from my own experience, you could start out as an individual trying to do that type of thing, and unless you've got good technology and good scalability behind you, then you might be all right at 70 with one person, but very quickly the wheels fall off. And it doesn't take too much more than that to, into the low hundreds and suddenly you're struggling to get the work done and you're struggling to actually provide the service that people need and will expect. I think there's been a big difference in the service provided by plan managers now than there was back in, say, 2018. The expectations are much, much higher. So, being able to keep up with that's a really, really important thing when you think about servicing customers. So for me, I looked at it and I thought, well, look, I think that in that time, there's going to be a lot of consolidation. I also think that the agency's been really clear to indicate about their desire to put in real-time claims and payments.
Yeah.
What impact is that going to have on plan management? I don't think that's actually going to do away with plan management at all. I think plan managers actually will play a really key role in that space. And I think they'll play a really key role when it comes to all the things that don't fit nice and neatly on, as developers like to call them, the easy path, of which there are truckloads in our sector, because rightly so, we don't have a shopping list of can't I spend money on this? And that's a really, really important thing. So I looked at it and I thought, I think we're going to really need to up our game with our technology. And without sounding arrogant, our technology is really good. We've invested heavily in tech. Our back-end systems are really efficient. Plan Tracker's growing really nicely. We haven't compromised our service for our growth at any point. That's been a really important thing for us. And so through that, I looked at it and I thought, I know what that tech investment's going to look like, because I can, I sort of see where that path needs to lead. And I thought, do I want to do that? Do I want to do that entirely, on our own, or should we partner with somebody to do that? And then for me, the obvious thing was, actually, this would be a really good time, rather than waiting 12 months, 24 months, and then looking to do that. Actually, now's the time, so that larger organisation can be in a much stronger position in that time frame and ready to deliver, whether it's still within just the disability sector or whether aged care has moved across into a more self-directed space, which, I think would be a very good thing in that space. And so we had always, ever since like 2017, we'd had lots of reach outs on a fairly regular basis around, can we be involved? Can we invest in Plan Tracker? Can we buy Plan Tracker? And I'd always said, no, not ready. Don't come and talk to me yet. I'm not ready. So went back out to the market, and was also having reach outs at the time. And through that process, for us, when I looked at it, Plan Partners was just a great fit. They're very, very, very savvy when it comes to their technology and their systems and their processes. They've got great people. They're really passionate about making a difference in this space. They're very keen to run the Plan Tracker business as the Plan Tracker business and keep, expand what Plan Tracker's doing, which, looking after our people has always been very, very high on my list. I think as a CEO, I think that's probably one of the most important things you do is look after your people. And so for that reason, we said, yes, let's make this happen. So it's been a fantastic transition so far. The two teams are working really well together, leveraging off each other already and just learning a lot. It's been really great.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. And as you say, looking after your people, so important. The team have bought into you and your vision for Plan Tracker, and to sell them that there's been a sort of fundamental shift, and for them to continue to grow as part of a bigger organization. Fantastic. What a story. And I wish you all the best. I'm just going to ask you a quick question, because I'm really curious about it myself. That discussion about real-time payments and the role of a plan manager, how does that actually look from the perspective of, like, what are they expecting? A sort of debit card, a Medicare card? Is that your take on the technology that will be applied? And is that going to be at a scheme level, or is that introduced by a plan manager level? I've had various different conversations with various different people, and lots of different scenarios have been sort of thrown and floated around. What's your take on where that will and how that will look?
My first take is that who knows quite where it will actually end up, because what's logical isn't always what happens. I think what we've seen is the Services New South Wales model of having a one-stop shop is a very popular model with our current government. And when we think about the digitisation of government services, we hear a lot of rhetoric around it sounding all very easy and lots of nice sound bites.
Yeah.
I think the reality on the ground is very different. And I think that's why plan management is something, will be here for a long, long time, because plan managers just provide so much more than simple invoice processing. But as to how it looks, there's nothing set in stone at this point. Well, I don't think there's been anybody actually won any tenders at this point to move it forward. I know the agencies have been out to market and said, hey, who's got an off-the-shelf package that does this? Which, of course, nobody is the simple answer.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't exist, and because a lot of the way of working is quite complex with the relationships and how they fit together and those things. So the simple answer is I don't know what it looks like, but I do know that it will, when you start to look at those levels, it's probably something that you need to be a reasonably sized organisation to handle. You're probably looking at some banking involvement or financial institution involvement. And I just looked at it and thought, I think for me, that gap is too big a gap between where we are today and where I think in 3 years we can be. I'm a bit of a believer in, if the sector can solve problems that the agency has, they don't have to look elsewhere. So if the sector can come up with a solution that meets the need, and I really genuinely think the sector can, then that actually makes sense and will take away the need for some, master program. But we'll see.
We sure will. We sure will. Fascinating answer. And yeah, look, I don't know. I don't have the answers either. But I wanted to say thank you. It's been a really, really wonderful conversation from the start of your own personal story right the way through your take on. And congratulations on the sale. We hope that all works out well for you. And I look forward to you and Plan Partners and the merger just going from strength to strength. I have to say, both you and Plan Partners, we've always looked at with a little bit of envy. We think that you guys do a really good job. Not that we don't. We do a good job too in the plan management space. We're happy with where we're at. But look, thank you so much, Elisa James from Plan Partners. Tracker.
That's right. Still Plan Tracker officially.
Still Plan Tracker. But, we really appreciate your time today. And in fact, for those people who are listening, next week we do have Plan Partners on. So we're very excited.
Excellent.
We will be interviewing and finding out a little bit more, Goss, and his take on as well on where the plan management space is going. But thank you very much in the meantime, Elisa James.
That's a pleasure, Max, and thank you. And thanks for cheering us on along the way. It's an important piece of work that you guys do and we do alongside you. So Thank you.
I agree. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed listening to Rock Solid People. For more interviews, stay tuned.